Hello everyone and welcome back. So in this video we will be doing the texturing of this wine barrel, as some of you requested in the comments. We still have to work a bit on sops, but it will be quick and then we'll get straight into cops and do some basic texturing. So yeah, let's get into it. So we will start where we left off. We have the UVs and we have the modeling done. And I want to create an attribute so later I can add some rust around these oops. And so for that, after the soften normals, so in here we have the oops, and I'm gonna just increase a bit the subdivision to 2 and measure the curvature. So measure curvature, you will have to have labs for this. And in this case, I'm gonna just need the convexity, and I'm gonna adjust the multiplier to 5 and the blur amount to 2. Let's see how that looks. And this is not showing us the true values, so I'm gonna go in here and change this. What is, I believe is infrared, and the rest is fine. I can just set min and max so we can check the full range. And from here I want to increase these attributes so it bleeds out a bit. So for that I'm gonna use an attribute blur, and I'm gonna blur this. So I'm gonna select the convexity and I'm gonna blur it 8 times, 8 iterations, and then I'm gonna create an attribute to just float. And in this case I wanna blur the convexity, increase, and set it to multiply. And I believe I used a value of 3 in this case, but you can increase it and it will grow the mask. So in this case, a value of 3 will do. And I believe that's all for now. So I'm gonna just disable the visualization, call it this out barrel. And it's a good idea to file cache this. So we sometimes Houdini likes to calculate all the nodes again. So I'm gonna just call it barrel, barrel cache, and save this to disk, just a single frame of course. Then we will get into cops. Okay, let's create a cop network, and we will copy this, Control C, and go with a SOP import, use external, and paste it. So now we could rasterize this, like rasterize setup, move it to UV space, and then rasterize the attributes, but that will lead into some issues that have been addressed before by people like Rowan and others. So like the bleeding of the edges will create some issues. So for that, instead of doing the rasterized geometry setup, I'm gonna use a wrangle to rasterize the attributes. It's nothing complicated, so wrangle, and it will be a good chance to learn something new possibly. So I'm gonna disable this, introduce geometry input and connect this in here. And I'm gonna also add another one and set it to UV and call it UVs. And let's see, we first need to create a UV in a UV texture in texture space, I mean. So for that I'm gonna use the relative bounding box, and you will see how that looks in a bit. Just stay with me in here. So we're using the relative bounding box, and now we can just say the Z component will be equals to 0. And if I assign this, so if I assign this to the UV attribute, so V at UVs, it will be equal to set, and we need to set a vector too. So in this case I'm gonna say uv.x and uv.y, I believe, yes. And you will see how that looks. So this is the output and the UVs. So it just creates a UV map in texture space, not image space, which is from -1 to 1. So, but we actually want to sample the attributes using the PrimaV, so we will need some sort of function for that. You can use XYZ dist function, but I'm gonna use instead the UV dist just to be different. So I'm gonna create the necessary variables, so U prime and vector UVW, and create the UV dist function. So UDist, and I'm gonna say UV dist, and you want to sample the input one, use the input one, I mean, then get the UVs from the mesh, get the UV from these nodes, and then we just need to use U prime and UVW. And then to control the padding, I'm gonna call it padding. I'm gonna use channel floats and call it padding. So this just controls the distance, and that will work. And then we can just say vector UVs, it will be equal to prim UV, so we can sample the UVs now. So UV, and it will use the U prime and the UVW. And now if we assign this to the UVs, so set UVs.x and UVs.y, we should be able to see if we create the padding, and let's say a value 0.01. So as you can see, we can increase the padding. This way is easier to control because I have some parts that are really close to each other, so being able to control this distance is always nice. And then we just have to rasterize all the other attributes, so I'm gonna create a few. So in this case, they will all be monos. So barrel, oops, let's create so this setup in here, and the other one will be the oops, and we have another one that will be barrel tops, and we will also need an ID, which will be the prim ID that we created in the first video, and we also want the RGB, in this case RHB. And I believe that's all. Let's see, the assignments are correct, and now we can just copy this prim UV function, and we can say f at barrel, and we can sample the barrel. Let's see if that is working. So barrel, yeah, and then we just need to copy and paste. This is a bit tedious, but it's always nice to have that control over the bleeding of the texture of the attribute, I mean. Oops. So let's copy these, and let's do the other one, barrel tops. So barrel tops, and we just need a few more. And I forgot one. In this case, I want to add in here the convexity. We also need that one. So let's put in here convexity. We can just copy from here. And let's do another one. In this case, we will do the prim ID. So it needs to be an integer. And finally, the p attribute, the position attribute. So in this case, it will be a vector, and we call it RHB, and we need to sample the position. Okay, let's see if that works. So barrel, oops, convexity, that's fine. Barrel tops, prim ID, and position. Yeah. So this will work for now, and we will continue in the next part. Okay, now let's import a texture. That will be the wood-based texture. If you were expecting me to create the wood pattern, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but we will be using some wood sample texture. So I'm gonna set it to RGB. I'm gonna color correct it a bit, and you can do that with the HSV adjust. And let's see how I introduced a value shift. Can be some to be a bit more reddish. I also increased the saturation and also the value, so 1.3 something. So you can see the difference. It just gives it's just a bit more vibrant, let's say. And now we can sample this. So sample image in this case texture sample, and we will connect the UVs that we have in here, connect it to the UV, and connect this to the texture sample. It's not texture, sorry, it's texture. But let me see. We actually need, if we assign this, let's see, let's create a preview material and assign this to the geometry, so geo, and connect this to the base color. You can see the scale is getting us a blurry texture, so we might want to scale it a bit. So let's introduce a UV transform. And let's see our texture sample and the UV transform. I'm gonna scale it by 5, and you can see we start to get more detail. And I'm also going to offset this randomly and set a seed. I have a seed of 6, but you can play around with it. And if we look at the result now, we start to see something. And let's see if we can increase this. And maybe play with this, and we start to have a bit more resolution. And at the end we will set it to 4K. So we actually wait for that, and we might need to enable and disable. You can see we start to get a good quality out of it. But for now, let's keep it 2K. Let's refresh, force the refresh. So we have the texture sample. Now we want to create some variation on it. So for that, I'm gonna introduce another edges we adjust. And for the mask, I'm gonna get in here the prim ID, so prim ID, and introduce a random mono and connect this to the seed. So that's our first variation, and let's set the seed to 51 for now and connect this to the edges we adjust. And now we can play with the value, and it will affect according to this mask. And in these edges we adjust, I'm gonna increase the saturation a bit, so 1.15, something like that. I have some values I'm following, but feel free to get creative. And in the value, I'm gonna increase this, something like this. So you can see the difference, and we will introduce another color variation. So in this case, we will use another random mono and change the seed. This time I went with a seed of 47, and let's connect this to the edges we adjust, and let's see our results. And of course we need to change the values. So in here I use the same saturation scale but reduced this to 0.5 something. So we start to get this variation. So the first one introduce a bit more value and saturation, and this one darkens some of the parts. And this is all based on the grayscale values we have in here. So it doesn't look like much right now, but hopefully it will look a bit better at the end. So let's stick with this workflow. And now, we will create the text that goes in here that says run. So for that, I'm gonna use a font, and let me see which values I used. So in this case, I'm gonna use a custom font that I found. So I'm gonna paste it in here. And if you want to know which font it is the Stencil Standard Bold. And I'm gonna say and change this font size to 0.5 something. And the rest is fine. I'm just gonna create a null and connect it in here and say out logo. And now we need to find a way to project this onto our barrel, because we can't do it in texture space, as you can see, because they are all scrambled. We don't have a continuous UV map, let's say. So for that, I'm gonna use, since it's just a grayscale, I'm gonna use the texture paint nodes, if it works, because sometimes it's a bit buggy. So let's try that. Let's create a texture paint. And in this case, I'm gonna increase the resolution to 4K, set the mode to stamp, and also decrease the soft edge. And I need to copy that path, so let's copy this and paste it in the alpha image file. Let's see if that works for us. It's still loading. And oh, I need to set the OP syntax. Let's see, and it's working. And I'm gonna increase the size with Control Shift, but as you can see, this gives us some some soft edges, although I decreased that attribute, that parameter. So I'm gonna, instead of using space world, I'm gonna use screen, and as you can see, that doesn't give us any issues, although it might get you some strange distortions if you're working in some angles. So I'm gonna change to the front view, and I honestly don't know which size I use, so I'm gonna just pick it randomly. So maybe in here. And I'm gonna use the mouse, since the Wacom tablet might introduce some opacity variation, which I'm not sure why is that doing that, because I don't have any options in here. So I just use the mouse, and we have this, and now we can create a null. And in here, as you can see, we have the in texture space, and I'm gonna call, and this is the volume, so we can import it into cops. So I'm gonna say ram projection, go back to cops, and we can have this in here. We don't need it anymore, but let's keep it there. And now I'm going to SOP import. So SOP import, use external, and get that output. So, oh, sorry, I need to copy it again and paste it in here. So that is working, but it's in the 0 to 1 space. We need to rasterize this. And if you guys know, as you can see, if I introduce a rasterize setup and set it to UVs, it will somehow read those UVs. I'm not sure how I can extract them, because I could extract those UVs and basically build a projection tool, but I'm not sure how to do that. So for now, we'll just use geo to layer, so geometry to layer, so we can have well, an image in here. And now it's simple, we can just create in here, let's see, a blend, and we will connect the foreground image. Let's see how that looks. So we also need the, since this is a black and white file, we can, or layer, we can introduce the mask in here. And let's see if that is working. And yeah, and it might look low res, but if we increase this to 4K, let's see if that calculates properly. And we might need to disable one of the nodes, and we have a bit more texture. And I'm also going to set this to overlay to have some of that texture bleeding, and reduce the opacity to 0.7. And with the, when we introduce some bump, this will work a bit better. So let's change it again, this. So I don't have to compute all the graph every time. So let's see what we will do next. So let's play a bit with the roughness to get a better visualization of this material. So I'm gonna duplicate this, set it to mono, since we will introduce some roughness, and I have the roughness texture in here. We might want to play with a remap to adjust the values to work a bit better on the viewport. So in this case, I played quite a bit, so 0.6. So something like this, and introduce some of that brightness. You will have to play around and see how it fits. So now we will use the same setup, so texture sample, and this, it's important we sample the same UV transform and UV attribute. So let's sample this, and we have it here. Now let me see, this is a big network, I have to constantly be looking at it. So let's connect it like it is right now, and we will do any necessary changes later. So let's connect this to the roughness and see, and we start to see some variation. Let's maybe compute the 4K, and you can see, hopefully it's going through the recording. And I don't want to risk it to compute this at 4K while I'm recording, because it might crash. And this is, after all, a beta feature. Now we will do some ship bump mapping or normal mapping. So straight out of this roughness texture, we will do an eye to normal. And let's set the scale really low, 0.01. And let's connect this to the normal. And we will need to reduce the amount. And we will reduce the amount of the normal by 0.15. So it will look better at higher resolutions, but let's keep like that for now. I might increase this just to see how it looks. And we have to do this. So it's looking okay. It's getting a bit slow. Let's reset it and see. Oh, okay, now it's a bit faster. I also want to introduce some overall distortions with another texture. So let's get another one in here. In this case, I'm gonna use a roughness one. So let's copy these. And I'm gonna use a Megascans texture, roughness texture that I found on the library. And I'm gonna sample it again. And I can use the same UV transform. In this case, I didn't use the same UV transform, but let me see what I changed in there. So it's basically the same. And we can keep it like that. Let me see the result. Yeah, it's similar enough, so we will keep the same UV transform. We could duplicate it and change the seeds to have more variation, but yeah, in the end it won't make much difference. So let's copy this eye to normal, and let's see how that looks. And we will change this, reduce quite a bit, so 0.2005. And let's blend. I'm not sure this is the correct way of blending normal maps, but I'm just gonna change blending here and change this to overlay. Seems to do the trick, so why not? And let's see how that looks. So that starts to introduce some overall scratches and whatnot. And let's change this again to 2K because I'm not feeling very confident about this. And let's see what else. Now we need to create the material for these oops, because the other parts are basically done. We have the color variation, the specular or the glossy, the roughness, and the bumpiness. And now we need to create this material in here. And I'm just looking. In this case, I'm gonna do something really cheap. So I'm gonna get this texture in here and do mono to RGB. Let's see how that looks. And I want to change this. And I have a color in here. So I'm gonna just create a single color if I can delete this one. And I'm gonna use this color in here. Just some saturation on the reds and a bit of value. So a really dark color. And I'm going for now connect it in here. So after this blend, I'm gonna use another blend and connect this in the diffuse or the base color. And I believe I need to use some attribute in here. So in this case, the oops. I hope those are called oops because I don't know the name in English. So yeah, and that starts. As you can see, we have some seam in here, but in the end, with an higher resolution, you won't really notice it. And I also am going to keep the bumpiness and change the specular, but keep the bumpiness of the previous texture, which is not the correct way to do it, but you know, in the end, it doesn't look half bad. So right now, we want to use that convexity attribute that we have to introduce some rust in here. It's going to be a really cheap rust, but you know, is what I am able to do. So with a file node, I'm gonna get some rusty metal, and I believe though the other textures are from Megascans, and this one I believe is from Polyhaven. So it's just some, yeah, it's not very good, but it's what I found honestly. So I'm gonna repeat this texture using the X style. So connect this to the inputs, and this node tends to be a bit buggy, but let's see. I'm gonna scale it quite a bit. So 13, introduce some rotate random. So 1, and play with the fall off and reduce the weight exponent to blend a bit more. It won't be perfect, but and change the random seed to some value. I'm afraid this will crash, honestly. I've been having so many issues with Houdini lately. It's not even fun. So let's UV sample this, and we can get the same UVs, why not? And the X style. So it will look something like this. It's not pretty, I admit, but it will work. So we might want to color correct this. Adjust, readjust. Should be color correct, right? But I'm gonna use a 358 value in here to get a bit more red, decrease a bit the saturation, and increase the value scale. Maybe not so much. Something like this will do. And now, let me see my file. So we will gather that convexity. Is convexity? Yes. And right here, we will remap it. So it looks something like this, but we want to remap it a bit so it doesn't have that gray value, those gray values. So something like this will be fine. And then we want to create a fractal noise 3D, and we will need the position. So that's why we back the original position to make this noise style. And what we will do in here, let me see what I have changed in this fractal noise. So we can increase a bit we will use this noise to break this uniform pattern so it doesn't create the rust everywhere on those hard edges. And let's keep it like that for now. Now I want to multiply this, and let's see how that looks. So let's right away connect these. So we have, I'm lost right now. So we have this one, and now I want to blend. We will connect these as the backgrounds. And where is the rust in here? Connect these as foregrounds. And we will use this mask in here. So it's a bit of a mess, sorry about that. I get lost in my own notes. And then we can connect these. So yeah, we can connect these in here. Let's see, yeah. See how that looks. So should be doing something. It is doing something, but we need to increase the effect. So after the noise, I'm gonna pause the recording and be right back. So we need, you can see we have that attribute in here. Let me change to flat shading. So we have that rust in here, but it's not looking any good because we need to distort it and deform it a bit. So we will create yet another fractal noise with the same position attribute. Let's change the center to 0 and the signature to RGB. I believe that's it. No, we need to change this to UV and change the center to 0, so we have a zero centered offset, so negative values and positive values. I'm gonna change this a bit to 1.5, we can adjust it later, and an amplitude of 0.1. Or let's keep it default and see how that looks. And after the multiply, I'm gonna use a distort, place it in here, and use that noise we created for the direction. So let's see. Oh, we need to increase the scale quite a bit. So let's set it to max and let's decrease this amplitude to point. We can just play with the amplitude as you can see. And I'm gonna change it to 0.01. So I believe this will be enough. Let's see. So as you can see, it starts to bleed out from the edges. And we might want to play here with the contrast of this noise. So we can create a remap. Let's see, and we will do 0.4 and let's bring it together to like 0.6. So we have something like this. Let me see if I played with the offset. You can always play with that. So let's see if we play with the offset, it will give you a different output. So I'm gonna set it to default, that's fine. So we introduce this remap, which help to contrast the effect. And again, this is a really cheap way of doing the rest. Let's maybe play with the distort. So let's see. But that just will give us. So maybe I don't want to spend much time in here. You can play with that and have a better result. I'm just giving you some information so you can play with your own file. Okay, now I believe the only thing left to do is to play with the metalness. So after this distort, we will create an invert node or a complement, and this will act as our metalness, and we will also need the oops layer and create a null. So this is it, and we will remap this, and let's see how that looks by default. Let's create a multiply and let's see. So we want to remove the metalness from the rest and just keep it on the oops, on the black part. So we can actually remap this to be 0.4 to make sure it doesn't create the metalness in there. And finally, we can just do a small remap to reduce the metalness. So in this case, I use a value of 0.84 on the white levels. So let's connect this to the metalness. Does this have effect? It does, and it looks better, as you can see. So I'm gonna risk it and set this to 4K. Let's hope it doesn't crash. And it's calculating. Let's reinforce it. So it looks much better. Hopefully you can see it with the recording with all the compression. And it's a bit slow, of course. And what can we do next? So we might want to reduce the specular on the rest. That will look a bit better. So for that, let me see in here. I'm gonna blend the original roughness texture. So where is that? So let's create a blend first. And it's in here. No, so it's in here. So let's copy this. Let's connect this to the background and use this rust texture. Where is the distort in here? This is a mess. And connect it to the background. Let's see how that looks. And we need to set this to multiply. I mean, we need to set this to max. And let's see. And that will create the roughness value for the rest. And let's connect these again to the roughness and see. And looks like I have a crash. So sorry about that. We will create again another the blend node and connect the roughness that is in here. I should probably label this and connect the distort. and reconnect the roughness. Let's see if that doesn't crash, and it doesn't. So I made something wrong. I need to change this to max, of course. So as you can see, the rust doesn't have that much specular now. So I believe this is done. I'm gonna leave it here, and if you want to elaborate from here, create more distortions and apply some more texture variation, and of course we can go back and change the seed of some of these. So as you can see, you can change the UV, the seed of the UV transform. Let's try another one. So this one is nice, and we also have it in here, the same wood texture. You can add some variation. And I think that's all, guys. Thank you for watching, and if you want to grab the file, I will be uploading it to Patreon right now, and you can also get some courses in there, some exclusive tutorials, and all the project files from my videos. So make sure to check that out. And other than that, thank you for watching, and sorry for the ramble, and I'll see you next time. Bye.